Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Yellow Darkness video, where today I'm going to be completing the game with all of XD's normal types. Now throughout the game, there are 17 obtainable normal types, and so there is quite a bit of variety in which Pokemon I can choose. However, the actual type variety of these Pokemon is actually very limited, with many being mono-normal, and only a few having a secondary typing. Now, with that said, I do think that normal types are really good in this game, and it comes down to not the normal typing itself, though it is still a very good type in this game. No, it's really the absurdity of the move pools that some of these Pokemon have, which we'll get to in just a little bit, but for now, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now luckily, XD actually starts us off with an Eevee, and right off the bat we're able to catch a Teddiursa, which Teddiursa is a very strong Pokemon in this game, and while Eevee isn't going to be the strongest, it is at least a decent Pokemon for the start of the game. Now, because there are so many Pokemon to go over, and to keep this video a bit more concise, I am going to go over the stats of the Pokemon and the general overview of them. However, a lot of it is just going to come down to my idea of how this Pokemon is going to function on the team. And so many Pokemon actually won't have their own designated screen because they simply are not worth it, or I never purify them. With that being said, let's go ahead and go over Eevee. It has 55 HP, 55 attack, 50 defense, 45 special attack, 65 special defense, and 55 speed, making it a well-rounded Pokemon for the early game, and it also gets access to Bite, which is a very nice move to help with flinching, so even when it starts to fall off a little bit later, it will still have a bit of utility. Now moving on to Teddiursa and Ursaring. Teddiursa has 60 HP, 80 attack, 50 defense, 50 special attack, 50 special defense, and 40 speed, and when it evolves it'll have 90 HP, 130 attack, 75 defense, 75 special attack, 75 special defense, and 55 speed. And once purified, it gets Refresh, Metal Claw, Lick, and Return. So it's very clear that Ursaring is going to be one of our strongest attackers, made even better because it has the Guts ability. Now the thing is that even though Ursaring is very much a physical attacker and it's going to be played as one, it does also have a few supporting moves that are going to make the early game a lot better. It starts with the move Lick, which has a chance to paralyze, which could get us through some dicey fights, as well as Fake Tears, which is always an option if I need to hit with Bite a little harder. And moves like these are going to be very helpful because we don't actually get our normal type for quite a while, so it is just going to be Eevee and Teddiursa for a good portion of the early game. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And right away, this is one of the fastest early games I've ever done, simply because Teddiursa can also attack, meaning that I'm able to take down threats quite a bit faster than most solo Pokemon can. And so we're able to take down the Abra, do a decent amount of damage to Horsey before taking it down on the second turn, and then all that's left is the Shroomish. Now there are a couple things I need to note. The first is that Eevee actually starts up nearly at level 11 as compared to most solo Pokemon starting at level 10. And the other thing is that because Teddiursa is attacking and it can go into reverse mode like it has, I can call it to lower its shadow gauge much faster, saving me time and money, not having to buy colognes. So after I mad dash to the Pokemart to go get my Teddiursa smelling great, I then purify it, and we can move on to the battle against the Power Rangers. Today I decided to choose Brown because I do super effective damage against the Baltoy, and Teddiursa should be able to take the hits fairly well. So with that, let's go ahead and begin just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, I do have to admit that the gameplay for this video was actually recorded quite a few months ago, and so there are some questionable decisions that, while I still stand by, were definitely a product of their time. So if you see anything that's very obviously a wrong choice, that's probably why, and I'll point them out as they come along. With that being said, we beat Brown and we go into the Cypher base to go pick up Numel for the charcoal item to raise fire type damage by 10%, and then at level 19, Teddiursa gets Fake Tears, which I decide to teach over Refresh, and then I go into the battle against Lovrina, which is with a Beautifly and a Love Disc, and right away I'm going to try to take down the Beautifly as quick as possible, because even though Love Disc does have the speed advantage, it really doesn't do too much damage, so it's not really that much of a threat. So I take down Beautifly, then out comes Roselia, which could be problematic because it does have Leech Seed, but I get a crit taking it down in a single hit, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, a Shadow Delcatty, and this is our next normal type. Now we just need to actually catch it. Of course, Shadow Delcatty is now pushover, and it is extremely strong. And at this point, I kinda just gotta hope that it decides to attack Teddiursa. It does. I get taken down to 4 HP though, so that is a bit concerning. And I don't quite finish off Love Disc. I go for a Great Ball, which luckily does catch it, and then all that's left is a Love Disc, which takes down Teddiursa. which was our attacker, and Water Gun finishes off Eevee. Okay, that's alright. An easy second attempt, right? Well, Delcatty actually breaks free and takes us down. So, a bit unfortunate. It does take 3 attempts, which I actually forgot to record the third one, but we have a Delcatty now. So, it has 70 HP, 65 attack, 65 defense, 55 special attack, 55 special defense, and 70 speed, and once purified, it will have Sweet Kiss, Secret Power, Attract, and Shockwave. Now, unfortunately, because this is a stone evolution, it doesn't actually learn any other moves through level up, so it will be reliant on TMs and tutor moves, which might affect its viability later in the run, as well as its stats not being incredible. However, Shockwave this early on is nice, and Secret Power is a fairly strong normal type move with a lot of different secondary effects. Oh, and Delcatty also gets the Q-Charm ability. But with that, let's go ahead and move on. Now, of course, you can't have a normal types only video without the obligatory Mirror B, who famously does not have a single normal type on his team. Hello, Mirror B. Anyway, we go ahead and pick up the Voltorb because it is holding the magnet item, raising electric type damage by 10%. And then soon after, Eevee gets the move Quick Attack, which is just better tackle. Now moving on to the Railgun Tower, I go ahead and pick up one of my 2 favorite TMs, Protect. And then I also get the move Thunder, which may or may not come in handy, but enough of the normal types actually learn the move that it could be useful. Anyway, with that we move on, and I purify the Delcatty, and then I go into another battle where I run into our next normal type. Now the thing is that at this point I don't actually have a full team, so Meowth will be on here. However, I have no intention of actually purifying it, and any Pokemon that follow a similar idea of either not being purified or just not making the cut, but may or may not be on the team, I'm going to show their shadow moves down here in the corner, as well as what they could have gotten if they were purified. So, with that being said, Meowth is a much better Pokemon as a Shadow Pokemon, because it does more damage and it takes hits a bit better from fellow Shadows. But anyway, we now move on. We pick up the Swinub with the Never Melt Ice item, and then soon after run into Spearow, which is very similar to Meowth in that it's a necessary inclusion, and it's a much better Shadow Pokemon. Anyway, with that, we now move on to the battle against Snattle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Lantern. And right away, both of my Pokemon are already very injured, so Teddiursa goes down. I send out Delcatty, which is at full health, go for Bite into Quagsire, dealing almost nothing, and not even getting a flinch, it hits an Ice Punch into Delcatty, and unfortunately Delcatty gets hit by a crit Shockwave, taking it down immediately. Then out comes Meowth, Ice Punch finishes off Eevee, so I send out Spearow, and unfortunately at this point there's no way for me to win. I decide to just go for Shadow Rushes until eventually I get taken down. Spearow goes down, and Rock Tomb isn't enough to take down Meowth, but a Shockwave definitely does. So after this loss, I decide to do some extra training to get Teddiursa up to level 30 to evolve into Ursaring, and this should make the fight a lot easier. So I go back in once again, and now with Ursaring in tow, I go for a return into the Quagsire, nearly taking it down in a single hit. Bite still isn't quite enough to finish it off though I do get a lucky flinch, go for a quick attack to finish it off, and then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, a Lunatone. Ursaring is in the perfect position to take it down, and unfortunately it's not quite a one-shot. So unfortunately it is able to set up Shadow Sky before I'm able to take it down, but once it does go down he sends out Cast Form. Another Shockwave from Lantern takes Eevee below half, and a Bite does almost nothing in return. So after a round of Fruity Pebbles, I finish off Cast Form with Return, and unfortunately I do something a bit strange. Really, I should have gone for Bite with the Eevee because it does move slower than the Ursaring. I know Ursaring can take down the Cast Form, and I could have started dealing damage to the Metang, which is definitely the biggest threat he has at the moment. But I digress. I go for Return, which gets a crit taking down Lantern. Not sure if it was necessary, but I don't think it was. And luckily I do get a flinch with Bite, so the Metang doesn't attack this turn. I go for another Return, taking it down below half. And after another flinch, I know for a fact I beat Snattle pretty easily. Though I do think that the battle itself was maybe a little sloppy. But anyway, with that, at level 31, Ursaring gets the move Rest, which I decide to teach over a Lick. And then at the Train Cafe, I pick up my next Pokemon, which is a Shadow Togepi, which is a very interesting Pokemon that will absolutely be part of the team. And Togepi has 35 HP, 20 attack, 65 defense, 40 special attack, 65 special defense, and 20 speed. So even though the stats are pretty bad all the way around, it does get access to some of the best support moves in the game, including Charm, Sweet Kiss, Yawn, Encore, Follow Me, Wish, and Helping Hand. So it can boost the damage of moves with Helping Hand, it can redirect damage by using Follow Me, it can force opponents into using specific moves with Encore, it can put opponents to sleep with Yawn, and it also has the move Wish, which after it's been used on the first turn, it will take effect on the second turn, healing the Pokemon's HP by half. So I can swap Togepi out to another Pokemon and get the heal. So despite the terrible stats, it is a fantastic Pokemon. Now it does have one major flaw though, and that is it is a friendship evolution, and unfortunately I could never get the friendship high enough to evolve into Togetic by the time I finish the game. So unfortunately it will stay a Togepi, but I think that's perfectly fine. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. And we go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and right away the Nuzleaf is going to go for Fake Out, and it's basically unavoidable. So Ursaring gets hit by it, and Spark nearly takes down Delcatty. I go for Attract into Nuzleaf, and then go for Return into Electrode, hoping to take it down this turn, and I get paralyzed, which is possibly a good thing. It does quarter my speed and make it so I don't act 25% of the time, but at the same time I get the Guts boost. So while it wasn't necessary, it can be helpful, though it might just stall the battle a bit more than it needs to. Anyway, with that being said, I send out Togepi, which while it isn't the greatest on the field right now, I do want to get it purified as soon as possible, and it nearly gets taken down by a Hyper Beam, though luckily Whiscash decides not to target it. Shadow Rave does quite a bit for a Togepi, I'd say, and I finish off the Whiscash, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Skarmory. Now even with the Guts boost, I don't think I'm going to be able to take it down in a single hit with Return, though I get a crit and it takes it down. So all that's left is the Nuzleaf, which hits one last feint attack, taking down Togepi before it goes down, and with that we beat Gonzap on the first attempt. So now moving on to Zook, who has this Zangoose, and Zangoose is going to be very useful for the end of the game. So I send a Premier Ball its way, and it rejects it, and hits itself and Confused, taking it down. Okay, well luckily I saved before this fight, so I go back into it once again, and this time it actually sticks in the ball. So we have a Zangoose with 73 HP, 115 attack, 60 defense, 60 special attack, 60 special defense, and 90 speed, making it a fairly fast physical attacker. And this is about the point where we start to see the normal type go kind of wild with its moves, because it gets access to water, normal, ice, fire, grass, electric, steel, ghost, fighting, flying, basically whatever you want. And even though the type coverage is incredible, you wouldn't usually use most of these moves, and unfortunately its best move, Swords Dance, it learns way earlier in its level up set, and unfortunately it doesn't get it through Purification either, so I would have to go to the move relearner to get it, which really isn't worth it at this point in the game. But despite that, I do think it's going to be a valuable asset on the endgame team. So with that, we go ahead and move on, and we run into another normal type, this being Pidgeotto. Hello Pidgeotto, unfortunately you don't make the team. Soon after, I purify Zangoose and Togepi, and then I teach Ursaring Earthquake over Fake Tears, and then go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and I go ahead and lead with the Ursaring and Zangoose. Right on the first turn, Lairon's going to go for Protect, so I decide to double into the Celio to take it down, and then on the following turn, I'm going to go with Earthquake on Ursaring. Now unfortunately, because I don't have a flying type at this point, I need to swap in a Pokemon to take the hit, and Meowth is the perfect candidate. I'm able to take down Lairon and deal a sizable amount of damage to Slowking as well. And then I decide to swap back in Zangoose, and he sends out his own Ursaring. Then Slowking hits a critical hit into Ursaring, though luckily no confusion. I go for returning Crushed Claw into the Ursaring, hoping to take it down and deal damage to the next Pokemon, but unfortunately Crushed Claw misses. And then I finish it off with Return. Out comes Primeape, his first Shadow Pokemon. Go for Brick Break into the Ursaring, dealing half of its health, and go for Return to take down the Primeape in a single hit, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. Now, unfortunately, Brick Break does take down Zangoose from full health, so I decide to swap in Togepi, and I'm just going to go for the KO on Ursaring, and then I'm going to go for Tri Attack, hoping for one of these status effects to affect Hypno, but it actually doesn't matter because Hypno just decides to waste its last turn using Shadow Down. So I go for Tri Attack, and it actually freezes him, which really doesn't matter. I go for Helping Hand with Togepi just to guarantee Ursaring takes it down, and we beat Gorgon on the first attempt. now going into the last area of the game, and the normal types are doing very well. So as long as there's not too many issues in Dark Isle, they should come out with a very good time. So now on the island, and I run into a Dodrio and a Raticate on the exact same team, which are both normal types, so I go ahead and pick them both up. But unfortunately they're both going to be sent straight to the PC because I won't be using either. Anyway, we go into the battle against Lovrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis, and I've already made a terrible decision by bringing a male and a female into the battle, because one of them, or both of them, are going to use Attract. Now I am able to take down Gardevoir right away, but unfortunately Gorbis is able to survive and hits an Attract on Ursaring, and at this point Ursaring has to take down the Gorbis because it's the only way to take it down in a single hit. So I decide to use Crush Claw into Roselia, which unfortunately doesn't take it down, and Gorbis gets a critical hit, taking down Zangoose in a single hit. So I swap in Meowth just to stall a bit of time and to take down the Roselia because it was already at such low health. And then she sends out her next Pokemon, a Shadow Farfetch'd, which is our next normal type, which unfortunately means that I'm going to have to deal with its confusion. So I take down the Gorbis with a crit, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. And unfortunately, right away, Shadow Panic hits Ursaring, but not Meowth, luckily. I go for Bite into Farfetch'd, not really doing too much damage, and Ursaring hits itself in confusion. Altaria uses Shadow Mist to guarantee that the next Shadow Panic hits. And because we're both confused, I'm actually going to speed this up a bit, because honestly, it doesn't really matter too much until Ursaring finally is able to hit through the confusion, or snaps out of confusion, which luckily doesn't take too long, because on this turn it finally gets out and gets a crit return to finish off Altaria. And all that's left to do is pick up the Shadow Farfetch'd with a pretty decent move pool, but unfortunately I don't actually decide to use it, and we move on to Kangaskhan, our next normal type, and a Pokemon that I definitely want on the team. It's currently the top of the S tier, and that's for good reason. Kangaskhan has 105 HP, 95 attack, 80 defense, 40 special attack, 80 special defense, and 90 speed, making it a very fast and very bulky Pokemon with a solid attack stat. And its moves make it so much better because once it's purified, it gets the move Earthquake, which is nice because that means I can have two Pokemon with Earthquake, and just like Zangoose before it gets access to a ton of TMs. Now, just like Zangoose, it doesn't actually get to use most of these because its special attack is so low, but it's nice to have nonetheless once again. But anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on. And we run into a Shadow Lickitung, and even though it's not the greatest Pokemon out there, it at least has Rollout, which could be useful, but it's not going to be a part of the team. Anyway, soon after that, I run into Chansey, and Chansey is a very interesting Pokemon because I think in hindsight I probably shouldn't have used this on the main team, but it does have a lot going for it. It has 250 HP, 5 attack, 5 defense, 35 special attack, 105 special defense, and 50 speed. So it is incredibly bulky on the special side, which against the 3 legendary birds is really nice. And once it's purified, it gets the move Thunderbolt, which is good against 2 of the 3 of them, and it gets Soft Boiled, allowing it to heal half of its health, without having to worry about the weather conditions being set up. On top of that, just like the other normal types before it gets a lot of TM moves. And even though it is a fantastic Pokemon, it does have a lot of competition from a Pokemon we'll be seeing in just a minute. But anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next battle. That being against Snattle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Metang, and I go ahead and lead with Kangaskhan and Ursaring, go for a return to take down the Quagsire on the first turn, and then out comes Scizor. And the reason I wanted Kangaskhan out is because I don't have a lot of moves that can actually deal with the Scizor too well, and I thought with a Shadow move doing super effective damage to it, it would do more damage to Scizor than it actually ended up doing. Anyway, I send out Eevee to take the Earthquake that I throw out, and Scizor is able to survive, but Metang goes down, then out comes his Solrock, his first Shadow Pokemon, and I send out Kangaskhan once again to finish off the Scizor. Now luckily I've been holding on to Metal Claw for this exact reason, and unfortunately it does not take down Solrock in a single hit, so it's able to set up Shadow Sky. Scizor goes down though, and then out comes Castform, and Fruity Pebbles now rain down. Now luckily Kangaskhan being a Shadow Pokemon doesn't have to worry about them, so I'm able to finish off the Solrock, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. Go for Shadow Rush into Castform, getting a crit, which is very nice, and then all that's left is the Starmie. I decide not to learn Thrash. One last round of Fruity Pebbles before I go for... Did I just misclick Metal Claw? Oh, that's so unfortunate. Okay, well, Return definitely would have taken it down that turn, but there's a very good chance Ursaring goes down now. Oh, never mind, it decides to attack Kangaskhan. Okay, well, we beat Snattle. I then go back down and purify Kangaskhan, and also Chansey as well, and then I go into the next battle, which is against Ardos. Now, Ardos is a very interesting fight because he has not one but 2 normal types on a team of extremely powerful Pokemon, and he even leads with one of them, that being Swellow. He also has an Alakazam out first, but that goes down in a single hit, and then out comes Kingdra. And you may have noticed I have Lickitung on the team, and that's kind of the great thing about the normal types, is that because there's so many of them, I can actually mix and match wherever I feel, and in this case, Eevee just doesn't really have the bulk, and Lickitung has the support of Shadow Panic to give me situations where I can have Swellow hit itself and not deal a ton of damage with either Shadow Half or Shadow Break, though unfortunately Lickitung's time is very limited because it's really only good in this one battle, and unfortunately it's about to be taken down very soon by Electabuzz. So it did quite a bit though in its time on the screen. Anyway, I then send out Togepi because the next Pokemon coming out after Electabuzz goes down is quite possibly his strongest Pokemon, and that is the Shadow Snorlax, our next normal type. And so I need to very carefully catch both of these. Now Swellow really isn't too much of an issue, I don't think, because I've already cut it down to half health, but Shadow Snorlax might take a little bit more finesse to actually capture. With that being said, it does half its HP every time it uses Shadow End. What I mean is that if it continuously hits them, there's a good chance it could just take down the entire team before it actually decides to get caught, though the situation is actually pretty good right now. Now, to harken back to the point I was making about Chansey, this is the Pokemon that is in direct competition for the spot because it too has a high special defense stat as well as solid HP, but it also has a good defense stat and high attack. So while everything seems better for it, it doesn't actually have a solid recovery move, and it also is a lot slower than Chansey, which is kind of the reason why I decided to go Chansey over Snorlax, but maybe in hindsight Snorlax would have been better. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to a Pokemon that does make the team, and that is Swellow. It has 60 HP, 85 attack, 60 defense, 50 special attack, 50 special defense, and 125 speed. And Swellow is actually unique compared to the other normal types for the rest of the game because I am not going to Purify it. And that's because its 125 base speed means that it's going to outspeed the rest of the Pokemon in the game anyway, and it already has its best move, that being Shadow Half. So it's going to be invaluable for taking down the Pokemon that are just way too bulky to be taken down in a single hit. So with that, let's go move on to the next battle, and this is against Gorgon. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring, and I send out Ursaring and Snorlax. And even though Snorlax isn't going to make it to the final team, it's definitely very useful in the next couple fights because it is such a bulky Pokemon, and with its shadow moves doing a ton of damage, it can take down some of the bigger threats in the game. Case in point being, Snorlax just took down Aggron from full health with a crit Shadow End. Now while that is a bit lucky, that does guarantee it would have done at least half to it, and I think it would do even more. But anyway, I take down the Walrein, and then he's down to Poliwrath and Ursaring. Ursaring goes down to a crit return, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Mr. Mime. Shadow Poliwrath is able to set up Shadow Sky, which could be a bit dangerous, but I do have faith that Ursaring can take down Poliwrath in a single hit, and while Dizzy Punch probably won't take down Mr. Mime, it should still do quite a bit. Mr. Mime actually outspeeds both of us. Return doesn't take down Poliwrath, and Dizzy Punch just way less than I expected, though it does get a lucky Confusion. Though unfortunately if Mr. Mime doesn't hit itself in Confusion, I think both of my Pokemon go down here. Dizzy Punch isn't enough to finish off Poliwrath, though it does show that Mr. Mime was a speed type with Kangaskhan. And once Mr. Mime goes down, Ursaring goes down to a Shadow Rush, and so I send out Togepi, knowing that it's not going to get hit this turn because Kangaskhan outspeeds and takes it down. So we beat Gorgon on the first attempt, and I decide to do something maybe a little crazy, and that is teaching Zangoose Ice Beam. I know how I just went on about how bad it is, and it's not all that great of a special attacker, but for this next fight in particular, Zangoose is a fairly speedy Pokemon, and it's the only speedy Pokemon I have that can learn Ice Beam. So I go into the battle against Ardos. He leads with a Ninjask and a Manectric, and Zangoose goes down a single hit. Okay, well that is not great. In a moment of desperation, I decide to send out Kangaskhan. Manectric goes down, but unfortunately, out comes this next Pokemon, which is Shadow Salamence, which, with the Intimidate ability, lowers both of my physical attackers' attack by one stage. And this is really the main reason I taught Zangoose Ice Beam, is so that I could maybe have a chance at taking Salamence down in a single hit. Ninjask is doing a surprising amount of damage, and Shadow Rush gets a crit taking down Ursaring, though I don't think it was necessary. I send out Snorlax because if it is going to go for another Shadow Rush, it at least has a chance to hit Snorlax instead. Quick Claw activates, and so I'm able to get off another Dizzy Punch, but it's not enough to take down Salamence. It luckily does hit Snorlax, but Snorlax goes into reverse mode. which is extremely unlucky because depending on the shadow gauge of your Pokemon, the lower it gets, the more often you go into reverse mode. Snorlax hasn't really been out that much, and its shadow gauge is actually really high still, so it is extremely unfortunate that it's already gone into reverse mode. So I go for Shadow Wind into the Flygon to take it down in a single hit, hopefully, and it hits, and it does take it down in a single hit, but then he sends out his next Pokemon, a Shadow Marowak. And between these two, I don't actually have a move to hit it, not in any meaningful way. Aerial Ace takes down Chansey in a single hit with a crit, though I'm not exactly sure if that was necessary. Shadow Wind hits Snorlax, finishing it off, and then all that's left is my Togepi, which is all support, so unfortunately it goes down as well. So I go back into the battle once again. As long as my Electric doesn't take down Zangoose on the first turn, everything should be fine. Ninjask goes for Silver Wing, does half to Zangoose, that's fine, and Shadow Wind hits and takes down Zangoose once again. Okay, third attempt this time, and instead of leading with Zangoose, I'm going to lead with Togepi, because if Togepi goes down, it doesn't really matter too much in this fight, and Togepi also has higher defensive stats, so Electric might not want to go for it. And luckily, it doesn't. And Togepi gets to use Ancient Power into Ninjask, with an attack drop still doing half to it, which is kind of incredible. But because Togepi survived, I decide to go for Helping Hand in return to deal as much damage as I can to Salamence before Togepi goes down. But Ninjask decides to go for Silver Wind into Ursaring instead, and Salamence just decides to set up Shadow Hold. And so Togepi is around for another turn, and so that might actually be fortunate, because Salamence was able to survive. I can set up Follow Me, that way the Silver Wind will go into Togepi, Togepi survives, Shadow Rush takes it down, and now I can send in Zangoose in a much more useful spot, because this next Pokemon coming out is the Flygon, which is still 4 times weak to Ice. Now, I know for a fact that the Ninjask is going to outspeed because it's already accumulated so many speed boosts, but something I didn't account for was that Flygon could still outspeed. And unfortunately it does, so had Ninjask attacked Zangoose, it would have gone down, but luckily it didn't, and so I'm able to take down the Flygon. Then out comes the Shadow Marowak once again, and going for return does half to it, which is good to know because even if Zangoose goes down on the following turn, I can take down the Marowak just fine. Though because I know that, I decide to go for Ice Beam into Ninjask and another return into Marowak. Zangoose of course goes down, and so I send out Snorlax. And then I go for return, taking down the Marowak. Never mind, it survives on a sliver of HP, which is extremely unfortunate. But at least the Fruity Pebbles have stopped. I decide to go for Call on Snorlax to raise his accuracy. It's not going to be a guarantee that Shadow Wind will hit, but it'll at least be a little better. I take down the Marowak, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. Aerial Ace hits Snorlax, dealing more damage than I expected. Dizzy Punch gets a lucky Confusion on Lapras, and Shadow Wind into Ninjask finishes it off. And all that's left is the Shadow Lapras. And I go ahead and swap into Chansey because it's only ever going to go for Shadow Storm, which is a special attacking move, so Chansey should be the perfect counter to it. I go for Thunderbolt and Dizzy Punch, which Dizzy Punch takes it down to low yellow, and unfortunately it snaps out of confusion, getting a crit, taking down Kangaskhan immediately, so I'm forced to swap back into Snorlax, and Chansey's Thunderbolts are doing way less damage than I expected, and this is probably the point where I should have considered not using Chansey, but I think I was already too far in. So anyway, I take down Eldis, and we now move on to the battle against the big box legendary, Shadowlogia. And I decide to lead with Ursaring and Zangoose as always, and Shadow Blast takes down Zangoose right away. Okay, well that's a bit unfortunate. Out comes Kangaskhan, which is probably who I should have led with because it is a bit more bulky. Ursaring gets taken down about a third, and Dizzy Punch isn't quite enough to finish it off. Okay, well it gets one last Shadow Blast out, taking Kangaskhan down to low yellow, before finally finishing off Shadowlogia. Now I go into the battle against the final boss, and he leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres, and unfortunately I'm in a very bad position here because Swellow's whole point is to use Shadow Half to lower everyone's HP to half, and unfortunately it can't really do that all that well when it's paired with a Pokemon with no Protect, or a Pokemon at a decent amount of HP, which Ursaring started the battle at. Now, I did get to learn that Ursaring can't quite one-shot the Moltres, but it does deal quite a bit of damage with return, so that is good to know. And Shadow Fire finishes off Kangaskhan. I send out Chansey, and Shadow Wind hits Chansey, taking it down in a single hit because it's got no defense, and then I send out Togepi, which actually has the perfect move for taking down Moltres, though it does have to survive not getting hit by 2 attacks, and it doesn't on the first. And it doesn't on the second, so Ancient Power actually does take down Moltres against all odds. He sends out Shadow Executor, And at this point, there's no way I can win whatsoever. I decide to go for Tri-Attack and Shadow Half, because Togepi's going down anyway. There's no reason to really waste any more time. And Shadow Storm comes out, taking us both down. So, despite a very bad performance, I do think that this is very much doable, so I go over to the Tutor Lady to finally give my team an actual set of moves. Kangaskhan is really lacking in damage, and it's a little bit lower level, so I decide to teach it Double Edge, and then I also teach it Protect as well. And then I give Zangoose the move Body Slam because Crush Claw is a little inaccurate, and then I teach it Shadow Ball as well for Executor. And then I give Chansey Thunder Wave over Skill Swap, and then I also teach it Protect. So now that all my Pokemon have a decent move pool, it's time to run over to this trainer over here to set up our ace in the hole, that being Ursaring. Now, the Guts ability already makes it incredibly powerful in solos and duos type of challenges, but the thing is that because it's on a team, that means I can pre-poison it and not have it show up till halfway through the battle, or I can strategically swap it in and out to avoid damage from the poison. So with that, I need to, of course, first set it up, and that's where I come into these two Dustox to quickly get that done. And once it is finally set up, it's time to move over to Greevil once again. So with the plan all in line, let's go ahead and give this a solid second attempt. And a crit takes down Ursaring right away. How extremely unfortunate. And unfortunately, I really don't get any better runs until the final attempt, on attempt number 6. And the problem is that while Ursaring definitely needs to stay alive, Zangoose also needs to stay alive because it needs to take down Rhydon, and unfortunately I couldn't get that type of luck on the first turn for quite a few attempts. But now I finally get it where Rhydon misses, I take it down, and then out comes Tauros. Of course the Intimidate ability does activate, which is a bit unfortunate, but I do have Zangoose holding the White Herb item to counteract that. And then he sends out Articuno. Now Articuno I don't think is a one-shot with return, so I go for Body Slam, dealing a little bit of damage to it. Shadow Chill finishes off the Zangoose, and then I send out Togepi, our secret weapon. Articuno goes down to a return, and then he sends out a Swellow Pokemon, Shadow Zapdos. Now with the move Follow Me, I can have Zapdos specifically target Togepi, though unfortunately I haven't actually gotten to this point before with Ursaring still alive, so I don't actually know if Zapdos is a one-shot. I am just hoping that it is. But Swellow does have the ability to outspeed and take it down if it does survive on a sliver, which it actually does. And so the Swellow finishes it off with a Shadow Break, and I go for Return into Tauros, and I take down his 2 remaining Pokemon. Now, in hindsight, I absolutely should have caught the Tauros, I just forgot all about it, but ending with Tauros was definitely a great way to cap off this run. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to actually use all the Pokemon in the final battle because my luck was actually better than I expected. It really just came down to the first turn going well for the rest of the battle to be perfect. Anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and go over how well these Pokemon did. They beat the game at a time of 10 hours, 20 minutes, and 24 seconds, and they lost to 13 trainers throughout the game, 10 of those being to bosses, and 3 of those being to random trainers. So let's go ahead and go over the pros and cons, starting with the cons. I'd say that the biggest issue with the normal type is the fact that at the very start of the game, you're very limited on Pokemon. You have Eevee and Teddiursa, both very good Pokemon, but you don't get your next one till the end of the Cypher hideout, which is a fair ways into the game, and you get Delcatty, which is a decent Pokemon for that point in the game, but it does start to slowly fall off right about the time you get to Snattle. Speaking of Snattle, the only 2 normal types that you get up until that point are Meowth, which is pretty good because it's a fast Pokemon that can chip down Pokemon that aren't Shadows, and Spearow, which isn't incredible, but at least it's there. And then after you beat Snattle, and then soon after get your Snag Machine back, there's just so many options for normal types from that point on to the end of the game that you can really make up any team you want and still probably do very well. And that leads me to the pros, which basically the normal type is just incredible because across the board there's a lot of fast physical attackers, there's a lot of bulky Pokemon, and there's also great support Pokemon, and their move pools are so expansive that you can really do anything with them. And because of that freedom, they actually find themselves in the A- tier, which is a new tier that I've created because honestly the A tier was just getting way too full. Now I would like to briefly go over where I think the cutoff for the A tier should be, and it's right about the 10-hour mark. Both Primeape and Dodrio are just a little faster than 10 hours, and even though Vaporeon is at the 10-hour mark, I am giving it the benefit of the doubt because it is one of the very first runs I did, and so I'm giving it just a little bit more leeway because I know for a fact it could go quite a bit faster. That being said, I did also swap Charizard and Dustox and Venomoth because I accidentally misread the time. I thought they were 2 minutes apart. It's like 10 minutes apart, so I went ahead and fixed them where they should be, and that's where the tier list rests for now. So if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!